up with our, thank you, Charles. Today we'll be opening up with our fifth panel titled Commoning in Community. These are more very, very lovely papers that came through in the call for the commons in the everyday. And today our two panelists will be Ryoga Baba and Thriven Naidu. So I know Ryoga is in the chat. Ryoga, just so you know, you have 15 minutes to speak, and then we're going to give Thriven 15 minutes as well. And then from that point forward, we're going to open up the floor for questions, reflections, etc. So please take it away, Ryoga.
Hello, good morning,
Morning.
everyone. So I'll be starting right now. Let me just share the slides real quick. Here we go. Could you see the slides?
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. So my name is Ryoga Baba from University of Tokyo of Sustainability Studies. So I'm in the second year of Masters in Sustainability Science, and I'll be sharing a case study about a unique commons in Japan called the Zaisanku. So I am currently based in a region called Fujiyoshida in Yamanashi Prefecture. This is an area an hour and a half from Tokyo, and it lies in the foot of Mount Fuji. I don't know if you know, but due to the lava land from the eruption of Mount Fuji, this area was historically poor in vegetation, resulting in mutual aid, such as commons. Here, like any other rural areas in Japan, we face severe aging and depopulation, causing decline in successors of industry and commerce areas. So, diving into what Zaisanku is. Zaisanku is an institutionalized form of commons. The tradition of common land in Japan came into being between 13th century and 16th century, but the ownership became present during the military dictatorship of Tokugawa Ieyasu. This is called the Iriai land, and the traditional way of using the common land is to invest labor to harvest natural products. After the Meiji Restoration in 1868, co-owning lands were demolished to accelerate libertarian way of ownership, but the villagers opposed to disposing this common land and giving to a new municipality government. So Zaisanku came into being as a compromise to allowing villagers to co-manage while the land is owned by the municipal government. So in the case of Fujiyoshida, where I live, it applies the same trajectory. In the late 19th century, the traditional common land, which was used to collect natural resources, were giving the uncultivated land due to the lava plateau of Mount Fuji. They were integrated to the new municipal government, but the right to manage the commons lands were given to the villagers, which later became the Zaisanku. So in Fujiyoshida, there are mainly two Zaisanku today and five subgroups to managing these common properties. The Owasumi Zaisanku, and I'll be calling it the Zaisanku A, has a great area that are actually leased from the prefecture in order to maintain headwater conservation forest. This is to protect against landslides and erosion. Other parts of the land is a common property forest, as well as the one in Kawasumi Zaisanku, which I will be calling the Zaisanku B. The subgroups define the villages which used to own these parts of land, but today only the distinguishing remains, and anyone from other villages are able to use the land. However, I want to note that there's a strong sense of belonging to the land within these villages, and usually the council members are elected or voluntarily appointed from the residents of these traditional villages. So Zaisanku in Fujiyoshida are mostly divided into diverse land to diversify the way of usage, and some small parts of the lands are leased to another party. So in details, first, Zaisanku A has two main parts of land. The part in the north is a leased land from Yamanashi Prefecture, but it is co-managed by Zaisanku. These forests are managed and maintained to protect against landslide and erosion, which obtains the purpose of safety to the citizens. So when collecting donations from the members of Zaisanku B, this point of safety is emphasized. The part in green, in the dark green, is a common property forest, and part of it is leased to an organization which holds a community space for recreational activities that are open to citizens. Looking at the income and expenses, the big part of income comes from fund transfer, which is transferred income from their pooled fund. About half of the expenses are dedicated to forestry projects like planting trees and maintaining the forest. On the other hand, unlike Zaisanku A, most of the land in Zaisanku B are common property forest, and they are managed by a council, consists of members from three villages. But recently, one village disiluded from participating to Zaisanku. Also, due to lack of members who would want to run for a council, election system was abolished and council members are voluntarily appointed after being the members of local community from previous years. More than half of their income is supported by donations from members of Saisanku, and some are from their pooled fund. As seen in Zaisanku A, most of their expenses are dedicated to forestry projects as well. So moving on to the institutional aspect of Zaisanku, it has a structured way of decision making. They are a legal entity, and all residents who live in the area are co-owning members of the common property. Decision makings are arranged by the councils of Zaisanku, which is constructed with 12 members. Both councils are renewed every 4 years. It is determined by the municipal regulations that they are required to have public facilities in order to exist. And the rights of Zaisanku is to conserve and cultivate mountain forest. Also, sanctions are applied if their activities are in contrary to public welfare. Um, and due to the nature that Zaisanku and their common properties are entity under the municipal government, publicness and openness to the citizens are emphasized in the documents. So next up, I mapped a systematic analysis on patterns of interactions based on the documents for council members and documents of accounting. So each Zaisanku has a similar structure in terms of cash flow. However, Zaisanku A is maintaining itself by relying on their pooled fund, which is importantly said to be depleted after 11 years. But on the other hand, Zaisanku B is supported by donations from members who live in the designated area of Zaisanku B. Um, However, the numbers of residents are decreasing, resulting in the decreasing of donations. Other involved organizations like recreational facility and hot spring facility plays a role in providing stable cash flow as well. So now let's look into the actual everyday practices of these common lands or Zaisanku. So I have interviewed the council members and also participated in their communal activities. So one of the interesting results were accumulated in this specific site called Fudoyu. And Fudoyu is a public bath facility located in the common property forest of Zaisanku A, which uses spring water from the forest. Although this is maintained by the Zaisanku Council members, many informants have stressed that this is completely independent from the common property and is being managed by local residents. So it is not owned by the Zaisanku, it is owned by the local residents, but it's managed by Zaisanku. So Zaisanku Council members would come to Fudoyu twice every month to, for example, clean the area and maintain the facility. So Fudoyu, the hot spring facility, does not only provide public bath, but also sells spring water. Many local residents come to collect water for domestic use. In the past, it was free until some people outside the region would come with a big truck to collect water for the sake of their business. For example, like coffee shops or like ramen shops. But nowadays, this fountain is used by the local residents, which takes place in some locals' everyday life. So it's central in people's everyday life. Um, Also near Fudoyu, a Shinto shrine and Buddhism temple is located. So local and even foreign residents would come to pay a visit to pray for good fortune. And many of the council members describe their common property forest as a manifestation of God that looks over them. This perception towards the environment is embedded in the Zaisanku because of the festival they hold at the shrine and temple twice every year to pray the god of mountain for good fortune. And this includes to pray for the protection of from the natural disasters. And some informants have said that this rituals has worked out pretty well, meaning that they haven't experienced a lot of natural disaster because of these festivals and rituals. So lastly, this Fudoyu located in the common property of Zaisanku A function also as a space to educate and share the history and philosophy of the region. Due to the slight age gap within the council members, an older member would teach the younger members about the myths and values of the spring water and the sacred mountain and so on. So, I was able to observe commons being lived by the local residents, functioning as a space sustained their local identity and stories being shared and passed down. However, these Zaisankur are facing severe aging depopulation, and they are unable to find any successors, which will likely to result in returning the common land to municipal government. So, as you all know, a well-known case of Elinor Ostram's research demonstrated that communities can create their own governance system to avoid the so-called tragedy of commons. However, while the debate is preliminary focus on how to challenge the inevitable overuse of commons, in some regions the numbers of commons are decreasing, and this spotlights a new challenge, which is the underuse of commons. So taking the situation in Japan, the numbers of Zaisanku are reduced by 28% in 18 years, and this is due to the severe depopulation and aging over the past years. With that being said, the tragedy of commons is facing a new tragedy that commons are disappearing and losing its purpose. This could potentially lead to several causes, but I feel like the perception towards the environment fostered while participating to these kind of communal activities and get-togethers will likely to be disappeared. So this signifies rituals and cultural practices will also disappear because the commons and the regional culture, as you saw, are closely related. So in the future, I would like to continue conducting more research on the relational aspect of this common lands to reevaluate what Zaisanku means to the local people and how that affects the perception towards environment in people's everyday life. So that's all from me. Thank you for listening, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Ryoga. We're supposed to have Thriven in the room today, but he has not logged in yet. So while we try to figure out where he is, I'm going to open the room to questions, reflections for Ryoga. So anyone, you can raise your hand and I will walk around with the mic, and everyone on the online platform are also very welcome to ask questions and reflect.
Thanks for your input. I wanted to ask about history and socialization, if you like. I mean, I remember reading somewhere that an American who lived in both the US and in Japan would find himself quite afflicted when he gets back to the US coming from Japan, because the culture is so different, where people give to the group a lot more in terms of the rabid individualism of the US. So the commons there, I want to say, maybe is a value where I recall when I worked in the teachers union that young children clean the classrooms, you know. So the giving to the collective is a bit of a cultural trait, and I wanted to know how much that helps. And then, of course, given that meritocracy or age is a big indicator of being the master, or and yeah, I know this from martial arts, where the longer you do something, the more you're respected. So is that part of the tragedy of it, in that people are dying off? But is it really a dying off towards capitalist ways of doing things, or will the collectivist culture persist even with the newer generations, if you like, you know?
Thank you so much for the point. So first of all, I'm not sure about the ageism in the social structure of Japan, but I could point out that these kind of mutual aid and supporting system in everyday life can be found in many rural areas in Japan, and I think this is because it is like very intertwined with the character of landscapes. And for example, taking the example of Mount Fuji, because they have the um, land made of lava, it was hard to cultivate any stuff. And it was so important for the people to collectively manage the forest in order to survive. And this culture of mutual aid still exists in terms of regional economy and everyday life. For example, a well-known case or like a well-known example is that people would borrow, for example, like salts and soy sauce from their neighborhood if they need it, or people are opening their bath to other people in order to you know, to share to like communally um, take bath, right? And in that case, they can reduce the amount of natural resources they use per night, per day. And that's that's the local knowledge that they have cultivated due to the conditions of lands, and that is still very vivid in rural areas. However, as you pointed out, it is also true that individualism is becoming a standardized way of living, and people are careless about their neighborhood, and they just only care about their their family, and also within the family, there's also a separation, and that is the rural areas in Japan are facing a big wave in terms of turning point from communal activities into individual ways of living.
Thank you, Ryoga, and also for your blog piece. But what you shared with us was extremely deeper and richer. So my appeal to you is to please, after this conference, please add more into your piece. We want to publish it into a little booklet for communities and activists and movements. So I just want to register that with you. The second point is, there was never a tragedy of the commons. There was dispossession and there were exclusions and enclosures, etc. But Harding in the 1960s got it wrong, because his abstraction was really about free-for-all property. And it's unfortunate that that piece became the most cited in the US Academy. But I do want to kind of just zoom in on what you said about the aging population and how that's impacting commons and commoning and so on. I mean, despite that, is there a conversation going on in local communities in Japan about the climate crisis? Is Japanese society grappling with how it adapts? And where do institutions like this fit in? And this is a big objective of this project, is to help us center the commons in our response to the climate crisis. So I'd like to get some feedback from you on that one. And then just lastly, I just loved your input because it took us into the nuts and bolts of institutional arrangements that can manage the commons. And in your cases, it's clear that local government structures manage common property. And I find that very fascinating. I debate that with some of our activists and so on around water. It's really hard for some of them to think about an institutional architecture that can manage the water commons, but actually that's what it is about. But my question is, it's kind of related to how democracy works in local governments. If you can just give us a bit more of a nuance. The theory is, there's democratic use of the commons. They are commoners. So what is the role of the commoners in this kind of local government institutional arrangement? What voice do they have? What rights do they have? And how do they shape commoning practice? Thanks.
Thank you so much. So for the first point about discussion regarding climate change in local communities, I feel like the narrative is very different from the academia or any activist in the world. Definitely, that's basically due to lack of information and so on. But most importantly, they, for example, Zaisanku is a people who manage the common forests every day, right? They are really close to the natural resources, which is passed down from generation to generation, and the ancestors have, perceived these mountains as a subject of religion, and they still believe that these mountains have this power to change their lives, and these practices of maintaining these forests means the most to them, that it will eventually protect the region. So they take really good pride in managing these forests, because they are kind of like the guardians of the local of the region by managing these forests. So I think the narrative is definitely different in terms of climate change. However, um, they do experience a lot of disasters, which is like landslides and so on. And I feel like they do not have the tools to instrumental tools to tackle these problems. And but I don't really feel like they need to, like they require such tools. They just, you know, kind of remain in the level, in the point where they just pray for it, and then they just think they have to just keep going what they have to do in order to maintain the relationship between people and the nature. And about the institutional arrangements and how local people are seen in the in the social structure of these local regions. So like the municipal government is kind of like the municipal government and these local residents have a little bit of gap, right? So if I would interview the municipal government or the city hall officers, they don't know anything about the local residents. They completely trust the local governments in managing the forest. So it's kind of detached from the context, is kind of detached. They only care about like how the money is used, how they whether they whether they're doing the communal activities and so on, but they don't really look into the daily lives of these people, right? And the local residents is, I feel like the meaning of Zaisanku is exactly that, you know, like not completely. I feel like the detachment from the distance from the officials makes local people you know, autonomous in terms of like, we are in charge of this mountain, right? So this kind of sensation plays a big role in cultivating this regional civic pride, and you know, kind of reminds them of their legacy and so on. And I think that plays a really important role in local festivals and rituals and cultures. But as I mentioned before, these kind of festivals are, you know, occurring with so many less people than 10 years before, and that is seen as a problem from the outsiders, but the local residents are kind of like accepting it in a way. Um, so yeah, I think we're going through a big change.
Can I see Farooq is online as well. Thank you for the presentation as well. I was fascinated by all the insight mechanisms. I think what I had a question was in your diagnosis of overuse. And I think my question here is one of trying to understand what do you mean by overuse, if it's a more intense use or more people, you know, using the forest, or I mean using, going to the forest because maybe there's, you know, there's an increased privatized areas and that's a space that, you know, they can use, or is it linked to the more individualism versus a more communal culture that also means less of shared responsibility and accountability, or maybe it's even, and here again, I'm bringing in tourism or private companies that are also in a way using the commons and commodifying in a certain way, which in my experience also brings overuse of the commons. Thanks.
Thank you. So thank you for the question. What I meant by overuse of commons is in the context of commons in the world of academia, which is led by Tragedy of Commons, and it is partially true in the Erie like communal lands in the 16th century. People tried. I mean, the government tried to manage the commons to be fair of the local community. So like people would take turns. Like you would have a day, like only this day this village can come into the area to collect natural resources, and the other day you have this region to collect things. Like that's this kind of management was still alive in the 18th centuries. But as the natural resources are less important in people's everyday life, people people nowadays don't use woods as a source of fire or so on, right? So I feel like the needs of these common forests became less important nowadays. And I don't know how that happened, but yeah, so the problem nowadays is more about underuse of these commons. Before it was important because people would want to have natural resources for their for heating installations and for example like these kind of herbs that they harvest they want to consume every day. But nowadays people just buy goods from supermarkets, they would have electric heaters, so it's less important, right? But the the value of these common forests was not only like the instrumental value. So it wasn't about natural resources. It was also about um, the perception of the environment, like the cultural aspect of these common forests. By going into the forest with the neighborhood, they gained social interactions and as you can say, like social capitals as well. And nowadays, because the importance of common forestry are becoming less and less, decreasing, also this cultural aspect is also decreasing. And that's the point I wanted to address in the presentation.
Thank you for that response, Ryoga. We also have a question in the chat. Farag, please take it away.
Thanks, Vianney. Interestingly, actually, Vish asked all the three questions that I had, but one comment, Ryoga. As you have an aging population, and for me, the day starts at your end of location on Earth. We in Africa obviously need to be aware of what's happening as we have increased urbanization, a large younger population growing. You people have the challenge of an older population and not much to replace that. What are some of the impacts? You've covered some, I get that. But what are some of the lessons for us is the question that I would go away with, in fact. Over the next 10 to 15 years, we're already going way into tech and large pharma and large agro business, etc. It doesn't look very good for us. And I think there's lessons we could actually be paying attention to from you folk over to our side. So hopefully Wish and the group will get that sorted out over the next months or years or whatever. But that's it. Thanks, Wish, for asking my questions. Appreciate it. Bye.
So much. Thank you.
Hi, Ryoga, did you catch the question?
Sorry, I wasn't sure about the question. I thought it was a comment. If I could ask again what the question was from.
No problem, Farag. Do you want to repeat that question?
Sorry.
Actually, there wasn't much of a question. You're right, Ryoga. It was more a comment. And that the challenge was actually for us here in South Africa and in Africa. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we have any other questions or comments in the room or online for Ryoga?
Guilty as well. Mount Fuji. Ryoga, just about tourism, in Barcelona, from what I've heard, people are campaigning not from a xenophobic perspective, but they want to reclaim their city from the rabble and the hordes that come with Airbnb and so on and so on. And they want, dignified, livable spaces again. I'm just wondering, in the context of, your case studies and Mount Fuji, I'm guilty. I also went to Mount Fuji and as part of that mass wave. But is that eroding the commons as well? I mean, is that putting pressure? You alluded to some of it, but yeah, just tell us. I mean, how these things could relate to each other, if at all. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We are definitely experiencing an over tourism in the foot of Mount Fuji. However, it's hard to say. So in Fujiyoshida City, there were former 3 villages, and one village is experiencing over tourism, which is the more like a residential or commercial region. But most of the common forests are centraled in other village, which is more in the mountains, right? So I feel like there's a division within the city as well, that people are facing over tourism, but on the other hand, people are living in their traditional lives, right? So I doubt that there are direct impact from overism to eroding the commons. However, in terms of gentrification, the land price are going up, and the hurdle for um, uh, developing kind of like a public facility or something like Fudoyu that I've explained is becoming harder and harder, right? So yes, there is a movement in Fujiyoshi City that people are seeing over tourism as a problem, and I think it's like starting to initiate these kind of movements of protesting against these over tourism. But there isn't any debate about how that affects the commons or the common use.
Thank you for that, Prof. Thank you for the question. Do we have any other questions or comments? We still have a bit of time, and Thriven hasn't shown up yet, so anything for Ryoga would be great. If not,
I'm so sorry. I missed your input. I think my question is, in Japan, is the common still quite widespread? So you're referring to a very specific case, but is some of the commons still intact? And what are the different land uses on the commons across Japan more generally?
So I feel like the context of Japan is very different from other regions. However, I do know that there in many regions in Japan, they still have a lot of common areas, so-called zaisanku, and also there are many regions which is still perceived as EDI, which is a more traditional way of using the commons. The only difference is that is it institutionalized or is it not? Because after the World War II, there were in Japan there were many lands that is untouched or nobody was owning. So many villagers would co-manage these kind of lands, which became kind of like the use of EDI. And there are other lands that are institutionalized by the municipal government and approved to be co-managed, which is zaisanku. And it still do exist across Japan. And the main use, most of the zaisanku is managing forests and to prevent prevent from erosion and landslides. So they would plant trees and manage trees, and also it has like a value for tourism as well. People would climb the mountains, so they want to keep the roads clean and so on. Other important commons is that the water and the rights of water. So in many mountains there are hot springs coming out of the ground, and there are many hot springs that is co-managed by the local areas. Like if I went to Nagano like a week ago, and there's like a free hot spring facilities all over the region, and it is completely managed by the residents. People would take turns to clean the place, and people would set rules together to make decisions together, and it's not privatized nor publicly owned. So yeah, you can still see some commons in Japan still.
Okay, thank you for that. We have two questions. We have one in Zoom, so we'll start with Christoph and then we'll move on to the question in the room.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Ryoga, for this very, very interesting talk. And it's nice to have somebody from far away. I'm calling in from Europe. I'm wondering about immigration in this context, because in many places of the world, there's overaging, and one of the solutions, possible solutions, is immigration to get people in. And I was just wondering on a view, or for a view, about the possibility, because you said that the management of these areas is so culturally integrated into the belief system and the local culture. Would immigration be a possible solution to these issues? Thank you.
Oh, that's a good point. A lot of we are facing a lot of immigration, and I can definitely feel in everyday life that foreign residents are increasing in this area. But as I said before, local residents who are managing the commons feel very, in a way, it's how would you say, it's more closed community, right? They have pride in protecting these commons inherited from their ancestors, and this I really hope that they would open up to collaborate and think in a different context to sustain these commons and cultures. However, I am not sure if they would take collaborating with outsiders instead of preserving their philosophy or like indigenous culture. But I think like ecotourism and tourism in the forests would push this barrier. Well, like they open up the barrier because mainly the local communities are always thinking about how to get subsidies from the government, financially, how to become financially sustainable. So I feel like it's the matter of how to promote these cultures in a more organic way. And I feel like the decision making among these residents and the outsiders and collaborative discussion is necessary.
Thank you.
Just, I wanted to come back to my earlier points about culture, socialization, and maybe I was a bit coy not to mention religion, the Shinto religion, and tends to link to nature. So when you say there are stresses, the stresses, are they felt as well in terms of religion, that people are not worshipping, or is the process both ways, I mean, I think that Amartya Sen raised the issue about Buddhism, where the obligation of people to be educated or inform themselves is a high premium, to individual commitment to looking after themselves and the commons, if you like. So I wanted to touch on that. And then my second issue, really, I don't know if it's a private debate with Martha that we've not had, is that I sometimes get worried when we are entirely against exchange and visits. I don't want to use the word tourism because it comes with a package, because it doesn't look like we are developing alternative ways of learning from each other, which a Zoom link is not sufficient for us to do that. You have to go there, and this can be done in a way that's sensitive. So once I think I was quite keen to looking at Bhutan and that, and I found the fee was so exorbitant for an ordinary person. They treat us all as Europeans, or some people with dollars, you know, $100 per night as a sustainability fee. And I said, but guy, my purpose for trying to go there is not like the others. So, and then unless you pretend to be an Indian national, you know, you would get a lower rate. But so I think that we must start thinking about it. And I wonder whether you have any thoughts on that.
So about religion, what I experience mostly in my field is that it's a mixture of Buddhism and Shintoism, right? But the more I see is the Shintoism in everyday life. So if you go to like around the city and walk around there, you could see many rocks that is engraved with kind of like name of a god, and they would you know, bow down after when they're passing by these kind of rocks. And so it's these kind of like everyday practice, and plus there are also rituals every twice a year and so on. And I feel like they they emphasize on this point a lot, because when I went to one of the communal activities, which where they had to cut down trees in order to make the space more clean, they focused on showing these monuments and rocks that ancestors have ancestors have created, and they are really focusing on cleaning the area around the rock. They don't care about like the bushes, right? They only care about the bushes that is covering the rocks. In the rock, it is engraved like this kind of god lives in this mountain, and 300 years ago, this kind of person found this place, and blah blah blah. It's like the history is engraved, and they want to show that to people. So their incentive is really based on these religious. I don't know if you can call it religious even. It's more about like this sense of attachment to the place, or this heritage that they have received among these years, or they were educated as a kid. And so yeah, religion slash place attachment plays a big role in this managing the commons. And about tourism, you have a good point, and I think in rural areas in Japan, we are trying to promote more of these kind of cultural ways of thinking, because you know, Mount Fuji is very popular right now from East Asian countries, or even South Asian countries, and they would come for like 1 hour or 2 hours and take pictures and go to other places. So local residents would feel kind of, you know, consumed, right? They don't really have time to like exchange thoughts or any others. But we are gradually starting to go towards more like a cultural way of tourism, or kind of context-based tourism. So we are in a phase where we are trying to explain these kind of religion slash place attachment context into our more like understandable context, in order to avoid the tourist gaze, and in order to you know, welcome guests as locals, right? So I think it's our duty to provide that kind of environment for the tourists. And I don't know how it goes, but I hope in the future we can propose as a tourism country, Japan. I hope we can propose something alternative that is not always like over consuming, or so on. Yes, thank you.
So I have another question. Thanks again. I'm really enjoying listening to you. And it's around, we've already talked about aging populations in Europe. It's been touched on. My observation around the commons on the African continent is that it's predominantly the elderly, it's old people that are protecting and preserving and living in the commons. And almost without exception, you don't find young people that are participating in discussions around the land and defense of nature. And I think this is something that the organization I work for, we're really concerned because we're not seeing young people. And so, I mean, obviously, young people, their aspirations are more to getting a job or trading, as opposed to using the land and the forests and the water as a basis for livelihood. And I guess there's a question for me around what does this mean? And how do we work to support young people see that livelihoods can be diverse and that you can create life on the land, because I mean, urban settings are largely unsustainable. People, the levels of unemployment are extremely high. And on the continent, there's very little industrialization. So there are no or very few jobs to be created. And so I think it's more an observation than anything else and a concern around what this means. Even yesterday in South Africa, they're probably the people we would consider First Nation people, but there was a march on Parliament from people in Namaqualand. It's in the Northern Cape. And when I saw the photos, the images, the first thing that came to mind, it looked like that an old age home was on an outing because there were just no young people in the group at all. So yeah, just wanting to see what reflections you have around this in Japan.
Thank you for that. I think there are several reasons why young people are not attracted to commoning, and I do see a lot of, I mean, most of the people who manage the commons is the old people, is in their 60s, 70s, 80s, right? But I can say a lot of things, but what I was surprised through my field work was that, you know, for example, like 40, 50 years ago, it was it was an honor to become like the member of Zaisanku because of a political reason. And I think it's about making it cool. What I mean by that is that it used to be an honor to become like Zaisanku council member, and because it is very connected to political bodies or like election body. So they would have like 3 different groups that they want to become like the council member of the city, and they would always fight against each other, right? And by becoming the member of Zaisanku, or the member of these managing the forests, they are called sensei. Like people would call the council members as sensei, which is like a show of respect, because they are linked to the election body, or like political body. And that's why it was an honor to become these kind of Zaisanku council members. But nowadays that these political bodies no longer exist, and it's more like a job that nobody wants to do. Becoming a Zaisanku council member is something not cool, right? It used to be a sensei, but now it's more like unpaid job or whatever. But I feel like because it was cool before, young people are more attracted, and they would want to become Zaisanku council members. Also, there was a reproduction mechanism of this kind of coolness, because people would call them sensei or show respect, or if they see this kind of person in the town, they would welcome in their house and kind of treat them for the benefit of connection and political, means. So I don't have a clear answer to that, but I do believe that we can kind of create the atmosphere of making commoning as a cool thing in a different context.
Okay, so we have one more hand in the room, and then I'm going to hand over to Prof to speak a little bit about Thriven's blog piece as well as Mafata's blog piece. Thank you.
Thanks. I think it's linked to this last question and input. And it was one of guessing what does this mean in terms of the demographics of who takes on the responsibility or the job that nobody wants and that it's not paid. And by that, I'm thinking as well that what we see also, and I mentioned it yesterday, is that because of reproductive roles and in connection with livelihoods and nature, it's often women as well who take on the role of the guardians of nature or the commons, no, that we see in the continent. And then Essen used to say that in the unions, when the jobs were unpaid, it was women who'd occupy them. The moment they became paid, then it changed, and then elected, then it became as men. So I think my question really is that kind of demographics. Has this have had an impact on whether it's more women now taking on these jobs or not? Thanks.
Actually, thank you so much. Actually, it remains as a kind of man-dominant community still, and the people I see in Zaisanku are all aged men. However, the interesting part is that in terms of decision making, they would kind of have a discussion about how they want to manage the commons. Then they would have like several times a year, right? They would bring back the topic into their house, discuss with their wife, and what is like some informants told me that wife is the one who makes the decision, like underground, like not in the discussion space, but like when they go home, they talk about it, and then it's actually the wife who have the most important insights, or like because like the women in regional community are aware of the neighborhood more, and they are aware about the community, because they would like stay in the house, and they would like care about the connection with the neighborhoods, right? They know about the underground politics of the region. So, if I just want to investigate this case with only documents and so on, I would see just man-dominant mechanism of decision making. But as I do interviews and participatory observation, I kind of see how women in the regions are taking part in decision making, and I think this demography has been going on since the beginning, and that's why it hasn't have to change and still functions. Yes. So thank you so much, everyone, for this time. It was a very insightful time.
But because of time. But Ryoga, again, just to say, we thoroughly enjoyed engaging with you and learning from your perspective and your research. And again, please add to your piece, because we have a lot to learn from it. And I'm sure activists and others will benefit. But there is a comparative insight that I just want to place in the conversation before I just give short overviews of the other pieces. So in Holland, for example, apparently they have elections for local government or whatever, but there's also elections for water boards. And this is very, very important because, Holland's all about water, right? And so the water boards are the institutional mechanism and architecture to manage the water system, okay? And I think it's fascinating, right? So also Europe, aging population, etc. And I still need to learn more about this and research it, but from what I've been picking up, it's still very important, okay? Because here again, you know, sort of water has a very different salience and place in the lives of those people. So I'm just wondering, at some point in Japan, when there's a breakthrough on climate consciousness, people will see these forests and commons very differently, hopefully. Anyway, I'm just placing that in the conversation for people to think about. So I just wanted to make some very brief remarks about two of the other blog pieces that came. We were going to have Mafa Mahodi on the program, but he's been in touch with us even last night. He WhatsApped me, and he's having some problems in his township around internet access and so on. Mafa is a male, and his piece was fascinating because it was all about his admiration for women-led neighborhooding in his township community in Limpopo. And it was fascinating to receive this piece from him. And basically, he tells the story of a township community that evolves over time and the role that women play in leading a whole set of sort of processes to meet needs of that community. And so these women confronted initially water problems facing these communities, and they organized as a group, and they impacted that. They were able to kind of express their collective agency, put pressure on the councillor, and get water into the community. They were able to impact housing processes. They were able to impact hunger crisis and the crisis of social reproduction in that community. So sharing, caring, etc. So his point is about how women working collectively, socializing their power, etc., can ensure certain material needs are met and commoning needs can be met. So I thought it was a very important piece, and we need to just place it in the conversation. The other piece by Trivin Mudli, I think it is, he looks at the kind of urban development to the north of the city of Durban, and he basically looks at how developer-driven urbanization is really destroying the natural commons. So right up to Umhlanga, Umhloti, Kawe knows what I'm talking about. She's from KZN, or, you know, the King Shaka Airport, etc. His core point is that these developers are kind of enclosing spaces, okay? Whether it's green spaces, forests, sort of natural spaces that people can enjoy, but they're also closing off access to the beaches, etc., etc. So there are these elite enclaves, basically on the coastline, yeah, and they're privatizing space. So this is the point. Lodi's looking at me perplexed. So the point is this, is that, yeah, I mean, if you go to some of these gated communities and so on, you can't get access to the beach on the other side. So that's his contribution to what's happening to the natural commons in Durban. He also makes an appeal, if I can recall, around rethinking planning and spatial use, etc. Again, bringing us back to how we can democratize local government and center the commons again. So that was a very important piece. And I think it again adds to what Ryoga was talking about, the local role of local government, commons, commoning. In South Africa, I think we actually have the potential, well, to renew commoning and defend commoning, because, well, we have a failing state, we have a whole set of other economic challenges, etc. And we have the looming climate crisis. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. So that reaches the end of our session. We're going to go over to tea for about 15 or 30 minutes, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Charles to do the next panel session. Thank you. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you guys had a good tea break. From the sound of my voice and the way that I look, I'm sure you can tell that I am not Charles. Yeah, so for those of us who haven't met, my, my name is Jessica. I'm part of the COPAC team and I'll be chairing our next session. I'm really looking forward to our next panel. I think in our really fast-paced and individualized culture, it's important for us to have a conversation on simple living, democracy, and the ethics of the commons. And today we have two excellent panelists who will be guiding our discussion. In the room with us, we have historian Dhupelia-Mesthrie, and online we have Naren Sewpaul. And as we've done it with our previous sessions, each speaker will have 15 minutes to speak. And then after both speakers have spoken, we'll open up the floor to questions and comments. And so to begin with, we'll start with Uma, who will share on her contribution titled The Phoenix Settlement, the Welfare of All.
Well, to start off with, my blog is called Sarvodaya, the Welfare of All, but I've changed the title to Simple Living, High Thinking, and Passive Resistance to Injustice. I've also extended the blog to include a later period in the history of Phoenix settlement. So this quote, simple living, high thinking, and passive resistance to injustice, was actually the response of Manilal Gandhi, the second son of Gandhi, to a question that an American journalist posed to him about what is it that guides your life? And that's the answer that he gave. And it was specifically referring to his life at Phoenix Settlement, which is located in the Inanda countryside. And it was very undeveloped land in 1904. The land was purchased by his father, Mohandas Gandhi. And soon on this very rural land, there were about 60 families settled. And to sum up Phoenix, it was an experiment in cooperative and simple living by people of different race, culture, religion, and class. So it was meant to serve as an alternative example of living from a colonial society predicated on white dominance, prejudice, and inequality. So in this idea, in this particular presentation, I wanted to explore what were the central ideas behind Phoenix Settlement, which is a place that served as a place of inspiration over many decades, well into the apartheid period and beyond. So I'm also interested in how a space like this transitions through time and different contexts. So that's what I hope to realize here. When Gandhi purchased this land, he was actually living in Johannesburg in a double-storied home with eight bedrooms, very fitting home for a lawyer, middle-class lawyer. But his second home, which he now purchased in 1904, was on this farm. It was just overgrown with grass with just a few trees and was quite far out from Durban. You had to take a train and then you had to walk on undeveloped roads to get there. So his home at Phoenix was made out of wood and corrugated iron. And the other families who joined him built similar homes, with some actually building mud houses with African inspiration. And so soon he had a village of people who included men, women, children, whites, coloreds, and Indians, using terminology of that time, who were also variously Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Parsis, and Jews. So on this settlement, class also didn't matter and all were equal. So with this configuration, I've argued that this space was unlike any other rural space in Natal. You can contrast it with the Christian missions, which were under the leadership of white missionaries. It was unlike the officially designated African reserves, which were under chiefly rule, and these reserves served as reservoirs to satisfy the labor demands of settler society, while there's similarities with Oshlange Institute and Dube's settlement. There were significant differences because Dube's mission was about uplifting African children, and it was also rooted in Christianity. So at Phoenix, you have this collection of people of different races and of different religions, and that's what makes it quite distinctive. The idea at Phoenix was actually to build cultural and racial interactions and appreciation. There was no space designated for a mosque, a temple, or church. The space at Phoenix, in particular Gandhi's house, was innovatively used for combined services, drawing on all the religions. So Phoenix was about creating a different present with a view to influencing a better future free of colonial shackles. It was also different from the sugar estates, which were symbols of inequality, exploitation, and violence. So it's in the middle of all sugarcane estates. Now, to explain why Phoenix settlement was formed by Gandhi and the ideas behind it, it was his most daring experiment, and what it initially started out as a press estate for workers. So Indian Opinion was a newspaper produced at Phoenix, and the workers of Phoenix of the press were meant to settle down on this piece of land and share this experiment in producing the paper. So it was a new model of economic business relations involving reshaping working and living conditions. So in the press, there were people of different abilities and skills. They were the writers, the opinion makers for editorials, the collectors of news, which required some kind of educational background. But then there were those who would set the types. There were translators. There were people who just bundled up the papers, who distributed it. There were those who were responsible for the sale of the newspaper, seeking commercials and so forth. So the variety of people, but the decision was made that all people, irrespective of their skills and abilities, would secure the same wage. So there was no differentiation amongst the workers. And then also, the idea was for the workers to live together in the shared space with a shared objective and to create an egalitarian, non-hierarchical village where all received the same wage. And if there were profits, then the profits would be shared amongst all people. Now, in terms of land ownership, Gandhi was the owner of the land. He purchased it for £1,000. And then he decided that each family would be allocated a few acres, which would be their home, and then they could cultivate their veg and fruit gardens. But if you didn't have, so they were meant to pay for this, but given the fact that so many of them were poor and didn't have capital, Gandhi kind of gave them the land and said, well, when you have capital, you pay me back. And there's no specific period. So it is an opportunity for workers who wouldn't have otherwise had a piece of land to live on, who now have this piece. So the idea of growing your own fruits and vegetables was in the interest of workers because you weren't dependent on the market. And also not needing to travel from work and home also saved transport costs. And the consequences for family life were quite significant because now wives and children were in the same workspace. And so the community actually managed the children. So women were also then free to come into the press and to help with press work. So it represented also a broadening of what one considered as family, because the greater family had a common purpose and vision. And success was measured not by individual achievements, but by group efforts. So while the project was anti-urban, anti-capitalist, anti-consumerism, and anti-industrialization, it was also defined in positive ways how to create a just society where the greater good of all was to be the guiding principle. So in looking at the influences of Gandhi, you have to mention the work of Leo Tolstoy and John Ruskin. So Leo Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You is actually, I read this, it was published in 1894, and I recently read it, and it's just so inspirational. He argued that while all beings had an equal right to live and enjoy the good things of life, the reality was the division of men into two castes, the one laboring, oppressed, poor, and suffering, the other idle, oppressing, luxurious, and profligate. And everyone not only sees this, but voluntary or involuntary, in one way or another, takes part in this distinction. So the rich lifestyle of some people rested on the exploitation of others. And what he argued is that we're all complicit with this. And so how do you get out of this? He asked the question, how can one have surplus food while there are others who have none? So Tolstoy saw this kind of way of living as everyday violence. And in order to get rid of this, individuals had to change themselves. And to avoid complicity, one had to depend on one's own labor. Ruskin also made a critique of capital accumulation. For him, the existence of the rich had a corollary. They had to be the poor. And importantly, there had to be power over labor. So he was interested in how can we have employers who put the interests of workers at the fore, and how could you have a business where workers had an interest in the business. And so this is how Gandhi was influenced to set up this thing. And both of them argued that to realize an equitable society, individuals had to step up. There could not be luxury for all. Ruskin argued the ultimate goal should be luxury for all and by the help of all in the distant future. So a simple life with a reliance on self-labor as much as possible and egalitarian working conditions were thus necessary for the welfare of all to be achieved. Now, the settlement shifted as Gandhi got more comfortable with what he was doing. He suddenly decided, the initial idea is that if there were profits, everybody would share the profits. But then he suddenly decided there's going to be no profit. So we are not making this a commercial business. We are not going to have advertisements. We're not taking on job work. We're not printing for the business community. And so that was a significant difference. The second difference was about the ownership of land. So Gandhi actually ceded his individual ownership of Phoenix settlement to a trust. And so this whole land was now in the, it was being controlled by a trust, and yet everybody else would live on it and they would work together with the trust. Now, another difference is the way in which this space changed from a press estate for workers to a site for the production of resistors to resist injustices. So the newspaper itself transformed into a newspaper for mobilizing resistors. This was related to the struggle in the Transvaal, where Indians had to carry registration passes with 10 fingerprints. And so the struggle influenced how Phoenix settlement was then conceived, because Gandhi now saw it as a nursery to produce resistors. The press workers themselves taught their own children. They took time off from work and farming to now teach their children, but the teaching became more focused on the development of moral character, so that service to society was more important than the attainment of educational qualifications for a professional career. So the educational regime at Phoenix involved enduring physical hardship, having minimal physical needs and comfort, and developing a balance between learning subjects, helping in the press, physical labor on the farm, and caring for elders. This was all meant to prepare oneself for hardships in jail and for service. Material possessions, the pursuit of luxury and individual accomplishments acted as barriers to become agents of change. So Phoenix settlement enjoyed significant success in producing men, women, and youth resistors. I'm shocked at how time raced, but I want to move now to the apartheid area. So what happens? So basically the village kind of disappears, because once Gandhi leaves, all those who were attracted by his charismatic personality left. But his son and his daughter-in-law lived there, and their family lived there. But it plays, in the apartheid era, it played an extremely important role, serving as a refuge for anti-apartheid activists and the space of political education and activism. So the newspaper closed down in 1961. But in the space of the press building, there arose the Mahatma Gandhi Clinic. And this became now a place of service to the broader Inanda community. So on a Sunday, you would see women and children marching up the hill with their babies on their back, coming to, and doctors then volunteered their services, and medical students like Steve Biko and them came to Phoenix to assist. And then as apartheid solidified, you have homelands, you have townships developing, you've got group areas. Phoenix settled became the one uncontrolled space where you could have multiracial gatherings. And it's the one space where people of all persuasions could come there. You had BC, you had Congress, Charterists, liberals, all coming to debate the future of South Africa. So the important thing is there were Gandhi work camps. So students from all over South Africa would come there, stay at Phoenix, live in the press buildings, in the school buildings, and there were training camps for discussion about what a future South Africa could be like. And so there was political education, and I have to mention Rick Turner very specifically, because his approach to education was untraining, how to get rid of the harms of institutionalized education. So I've argued that, so the camps involved agricultural work, social work amongst the neighboring communities. And the first camp had like 70 youths there. So one student regarded this as an oasis in the dry desert land of apartheid. So it's an example of how a space that is not controlled by the state or municipalities and so forth became a space that was a shared space to debate the future. So it was called a kind of commonwealth, a kind of shared society. And as apartheid intensified in the 80s and became really more stringent and harsher, Phoenix settlement became home for refugees of attacks by apartheid agents, like in Kata and the townships, and you had 25 African families living here. So in a sense, and these refugees kind of lived in the way in which Gandhi would have liked people to live, sharing a space and cooking, communal life, and so forth. So just as apartheid eliminated spaces like District 6 and Sophiatown, it actually eliminated Phoenix settlement. In 1985, the whole settlement was razed and Gandhi's house was actually stripped to its foundation. And so there's a long story about how, who and why was involved, but Inkatha played a very big role. So I'm going to stop there because there's a lot, you know, you could talk about Phoenix settlement through time, even in the current era, but I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that insightful contribution. Next, we'll move on to Naren, who's online, and he'll share on the contribution titled Sissy Ghoul House, Commoners, Commoning, and the Commons. I've noted your comment in the chat, so you don't have to worry about turning your camera on. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, greetings everybody. My name's Naren Sewpaul, and I work in the creative arts and cultural space as a social artist and focusing on the role of the arts and through social justice, social solidarity, and working around the power of community through the arts, in the arts, and for the arts. So I'm happy to be here. And today I'm talking specifically around representing the Cape Town Commoners Collective. And I will talk about the story of Sissy Ghoul House in Woodstock. Have shared the PDF of my presentation in the chat, and I look forward to speaking more around the issues around simple living, democracy, and the ethics of care and the ethics of the commons during the dialogue and during any questions. Thank you. So the old abandoned hospital in Woodstock was occupied by housing activists from the housing social movement called Reclaim the City. And this took place in 2017. The occupation was an act of defiance to the spatial apartheid policies that are still advocated by the city of Cape Town. And that being the background to that response, you know, of activism is important to note in this conversation. So the occupiers effectively organized their plans with leadership teams. They set up monitoring teams. There was a team that specifically dedicated towards maintenance work. And the hospital corridors and what used to be the wards were converted into living spaces with street names that had brought significance in the lives of the occupiers. This is a working class group of people, but the history behind their lives is also related to activism from the time of the forced removals in South Africa. So we're looking at a group of people who really know the value of social justice and really used the capacity for community change and for social change to carry out their actions. So one of the other things that happened at the venue was the unattended garden was revived into a place of natural beauty, and it was renamed the Nur Toffee Garden because he started the conversations and the work around the garden space. And of course, Reclaim the City and the occupiers were not working in a vacuum. They have had support from many activist organizations. and with legal expertise from Indefuna Ukwazi, the legal partner, Sissigul House celebrated victory in all their court cases against the city. And with other support from the Cape Town Commoners Group, from ILRIG, from the City Occupied program, from UCT, with all other support, the residents engaged through a process of co-design. Now, that was a process of participatory decision-making. And we looked at the story of Sissigul House, and we looked at what are the main issues that needed to be addressed. And what came as a result of that was a co-design interactive exhibition. And this exhibition was launched in 2022, and it tells the story of Sissigul House as a commons. And it was created by all the participants. So the exhibition, the information that was on the panels of the exhibition were all created in the workshops as part of the participatory decision making. And so the process also involved dialogue, workshops, and creative activities. So the creative activity here is the exhibition. Part of that process that built up towards the exhibition was a reimagining of what Sissigul House would look like in the future. And what happened is they all came together and they developed a model of what this place would look like. And they all worked together to create that, and that's included in the exhibition. So more than that, after that process, the exhibition was launched in Sissigul House. It was very well attended, and it also included a lot of, because it's an interactive exhibition, there was a lot of dialogue from the visitors that came to it. And after that, the exhibition followed its own journey through Cape Town to sort of venues in Cape Town, like the District 6 Homecoming Center, and the Cape Institute for Architects, and also out of Cape, well, it's still Cape Town, okay, and the Cape Flats in Bonteheuwel. The exhibition was launched there. And the exhibition also, through our networking, took place in Tshwane, in Johannesburg, about 2 years ago. I cannot remember now whether it was at Wits or whether it was at University of Johannesburg. There was a conference there. It also found its way to Turin and Argentina, and also with support from another organization, international organization called the Habitat International Coalition. The exhibition sparked a lot of interest in the urban commons through webinars with countries on the African continent. And what was interesting about that was the focus was on decentralizing and decentralization and shifting responsibilities that are related to the needs of community to local government level. Of course, those were just conversations, and those were a starting point of discussion around that. But since then, the conversations have also taken place in KwaZulu-Natal, in Durban, together with Abashlali Basa Mjondolo, who have done similar work to reclaim the city in KwaZulu-Natal. So the exhibition, besides the exhibition, one of the things we did with the groupings, with the people who live there, was a visioning workshop. Before we even got to the exhibition or before we got into strategic thinking. And the visioning workshop asked the question to the participants, where do you see Sissy Gould House in the future or in the next 5 years? And the response to that was, well, we see it, and we experience Sissy Gould House already as a place of homecoming. Now that was really moving, for the participants to share that and for the facilitators. It actually put us immediately into the ethics of care and the ethics of the commons in that conversation. And related to that, the evidence of it being homecoming, a place of homecoming, was also a library was set up for the children, and youth have gradually become increasingly involved in the development of their home. And social activists from Sao Paulo, from Argentina, and from Rojava have visited to share their experiences, not just only about housing issues, but generally about a range of different challenges. And we were fortunate to have the representatives from the women's movement in Rojava who came to talk about their work. So we've had that kind of exchange. There's also been right from the outset, after 2017, there have been many other interventions that were specifically done that related to, well, demonstrated the ethics of care and the ethics of social solidarity. And some of these were short films, and we on housing cooperatives and also cooperatives in different areas of work. We just had a conversation around that. There was a sort of a film screening. There was a documentary. It still exists. You can download it. It's from the City Occupied Collective, a research group, part of UCT. And City Occupied was a documentary that included their experience and conditions under which the occupiers had to occupy the building, and they spoke about their previous life experiences, their work experiences. So that's in the City Occupied documentary. That documentary also includes other places that were occupied in the world, as I said, in Bogota, and in I think it was Colombia. I will check that again. But so there was that interaction, and then more recently was the documentary which tells the story of the occupation. So it's like a docudrama, and if you do get an opportunity to see it, I would recommend you do that. It's really a wonderful. It just gives wonderful insight into what life is like in the occupation and what activities have taken place that led to that. And yes, so there's the city and the Mother City documentary, which that was also screened there, and it was screened at other festivals, film festivals here. And of course, we also have partnered with doing webinars in food sovereignty, which were hosted with speakers from La Via Campesina and from COPAC. So the kind of work we do through Sissigul House from the Commons Collective is related to various different aspects of life and living. So in ending this conversation, the major challenge there has always been around working towards developing strategies for meaningful engagement, which is related, that is a strategy related to the PI Act, but it was also, we've also been talking about ways of working towards public commons partnerships. That is something that is going to take a little longer than we expected it to take. And it is also something that doesn't fit into neoliberal policies. But we're working at it together with many partner organizations. And as I said, it's quite a complex process, but we hope to continue it. So Sissigul House, again, has resilience, and with social solidarity from its support organizations, which is about resilience itself. It is also about meeting community needs, and it's about the social life, and in time it's also about peer governance. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to chatting more about this soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Naren, for that contribution. We'll now open up the floor to comments and questions for both Naren and Uma. Anyone in the room or online?
Thank you. Right. Thank you, Ms. Uma, for that inspiring talk. I really heard about how Phoenix was an area that was developed by a people with a certain vision, and they, while they were provided a space, they were not given access to the trimmings that make a human activity human. They'd be given space and not be given a place to actualize, like a spiritual place to develop themselves spiritually. And I can also thank you for highlighting this. And it was interesting to learn that it was a space that was frequented by multiple race even at that time, sort of like another space that is in KwaZulu-Natal called Gwasiza Bantu, by a man who was from Sweden, who came to make a mission house. And at this mission house, Black people could be, white people could come. Even today, the white people there are able to speak a different language, Zulu, sort of like the Indians of KwaZulu-Natal can speak an indigenous language. And that is really progressive for humankind, to be able to be multilingual within the society. I also got that what exactly commons is. It's a space that people frequent. Of course, this is something that I should have known before, but as I'm listening to these talks, it becomes clearer what commons is. It's a place where commoners are available, are accessed, and a commoner is not a bad person. It is someone that is wanting to be part of a collective, and they shouldn't be stereotyped as someone that is lowly and base, but someone that is part of a group of individuals that have an outlook that is predominantly for spiritual upliftment. And I'm also curious about the link. So I see the appearance of Gandhi, and I want to know why he was dentally compromised. Now, I'm sorry for off-ramping a little bit, but this is his space and this is his common space. Can we give him healing that the injustices that were happening were hurting his heart or were giving him such grief? His body and how he left, what does that attest? So my question is, the life of Gandhi, how does it attest to how his appearance was, physical body, as well as how he departed? So we can imagine that since he appeared the way he was, he looked like a somewhat humorous person. I don't know if someone ever mentioned that, like he had a lot of sense of humor. So as the body, my question is, the body of Gandhi as a common space for his thoughts, for his spiritual development, how can we help him heal and ascend today as the master that he is? How can we comfort him and tell him the things that happened to your body were relating to how you were feeling, and maybe we can find a link to how we can help ourselves today in our bodies as a common space for thinking and feeling. And the second question, it is a question, is for the second speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Sewpaul. And it's about the Cape Town Jazz Festival and how artists coped as a group, as commoners in art. That jazz festival was put on hold, and that could have caused a lot of heartache and loss of income economically, and a lot of purpose or not accessing of their purpose. So it could have caused a whole lot of problems. The halting of the Cape Town Jazz Festival. How did they comfort themselves after not having this facility as a group of musicians and a group of merchants that would be making business in the Cape Town Jazz Festival as planners across the organogram of the festival? How did they comfort themselves? How did they cope with this pain of having the Cape Town Jazz Festival as a common space for musicking to be closed? What was your coping mechanism? How did you comfort yourself?
Uma, you can respond, and then we'll jump to Naren.
So thank you for the comment and the questions. I'd love to know more about Sizwa Bantu because I don't know enough about it, so we can talk about it over tea and lunch. I'm glad you asked the question about the body because I couldn't go into, if you had to think of Gandhi's politics, it can be summed up as biomoral politics. The body is at the center of all his deliberations. The body needs to be controlled, the body needs to be attended to in order for you to do all the good things that you need to do. So he was very conscious about food and experimented with a whole lot of things, like he went on a fruit and nuts diet only at one stage, which contributed to the deterioration of his teeth in longer life. Also, walking was a very crucial part. The physical labor, the body and labor was very important to his politics. So that's also significant. He wrote an 18-part serialized episodes for Indian Opinion on health and how everything is linked to what you eat, what you do, and also sex. He took a vow against, celibacy. So all this is connected to his politics. It's a complex politics. In terms of healing, I think, the biggest situation, well, he was assassinated, but he continues to be assassinated, if I had to put it that way. In India, he's assassinated by right-wing activists. In Africa, he's now very much like how Mandela is critiqued, by younger generations. He's also critiqued for his race politics. And so, I wanted to focus on his legacy. And so his legacy can be seen very differently by different people. What is his legacy? His legacy was the Natal Indian Congress. I say no, it was just one thing that he did. I think you can think of his legacy in terms of his role in creating an alternate media. It's part of the alternative press in South Africa. But Phoenix Settlement, to me, embodied the essence of what is Gandhiism. And so that is how I would like him to be remembered. And so, the question of how one recovers Gandhi and from the times that we are in, and to see the good and that he did. And so that's how I've seen, approaching Gandhi, his body and his legacy. So I'll stop there.
We'll take a few more questions and then have a response.
I hope you will forgive me for this, but it's something that I'm very curious about. I think that we often hero worship people, and I certainly did hero worship Gandhi until I found something out that disturbed me very deeply. And also, it's something that doesn't typically come up. And that is that he slept, in one of his experiments, was to sleep naked next to a young woman. And I mean, I find it very interesting. Of course, I understand you don't want to bring that up because you're talking about his legacy. But, and I'm curious also if everybody knows that, or if that's new. No? I don't know, you did, yeah. So anyway, I guess I'm just curious about kind of the role that plays, and how that sort of affects his legacy to a certain degree. And then also, separate to that, I'm very curious, you were saying that children were kind of raised in this very alternative way, where they were forced to do like, hard physical labor, etc. And so I guess I wonder about this. I wonder about the experience of the children who were forced to do these things. They were, in a way, prepared for a hard life, potentially to go to jail. And I wonder about the choices that the children had. And then also I really worry about the choices of the young girls who were probably forced. I can't think that they would have liked sleeping next to a naked old man.
Shall I respond now? You take a round.
We'll take a few more questions and then have a collective response. Okay, let's start with Charles.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you so much, Uma and Naren, for the thought-provoking presentations you made. Just two quick points. One is on the importance of simple living in a fast-paced world. We are still on the treadmill of Fordism, and things are getting worse. We are bombarded by advertisements all over the place. What people have been noticing around our airports is the amount of betting advertisements you see on South Africa's airports. And South Africa is becoming a gambling addicted nation. Gambling now is hitting 1.5 trillion rands annually. It's up from 1.1 trillion last year. So we are becoming a gambling addicted nation. But the second one is just around, sorry. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. The second one is around the land commons and the struggles that are still being fought around that. I'm thinking about the Transition Township Initiative that was set up by Janet and others in KwaZakele in Nelson Mandela Bay. So they took this piece of land, which is called the Gap Tap. It's a piece of land where the apartheid government would put up a single tap that would support like 25 households surrounding it, would not have access to water directly in their homes. So what they did with this gap tap, they set up solar panels and they connected it to the municipal grid. And they said to the municipality, we are selling electricity to the grid. Now this was at the height of load shedding when we really needed electricity. But then they were sent from pillar to post because the municipality was saying, well, you don't own the land, you don't have a lease. We don't appreciate the fact that you take it as a collectively managed space, as a commons. You need a lease in order to be registered under the Finance Management Act and all of that. So there's been these pieces of legislation that have been enacted against the commons and bringing together new forms of enclosures. So just like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you to both of you. That was amazing, Naren and Uma. And I actually wanted to construct this panel this way because these two examples talk to each other in interesting ways. But so the first point is around, going beyond iconicization and hero worship and so on. I mean, I think in this space, that's not what the conversation is about. I think because Gandhi has had a very kind of important role in anti-colonial resistance and so on, there is the mythic Gandhi. But I think in the times we are living in today, we've got to kind of refine kind of what is important and what is relevant. And that doesn't mean, of course, being selective and sidestepping controversies, etc. My point around this is that nobody's born perfect. And in the context, particularly if you're a public figure, in the context of your public life, you also grow and you change. There's political formation. It's a process, okay? Nelson Mandela didn't start up his politics as a non-racialist. He was actually a narrow African nationalist, okay? But I don't think we should judge Nelson Mandela by that, because Nelson Mandela has had a long political life, and he evolved and he grew and he became a better political being, actually. So I just want to place that in the conversation, because I'm also going to Phoenix Settlement on Monday, and I'm going to spend time there and so on. And it's because of this imperative. I actually think that there's two things. The one is around the ecological in Gandhi, because I really think that where we are at today in the world, we've got to find the intellectual resources that can help us go forward, kind of tackle the big challenges we face and so on. Now, Gandhi was interesting in terms of his critique of Western modernity, okay? And he was actually pioneering. I mean, many people in the West put up Rachel Carson in the early 60s in a critique of poisons and so on as being the kind of founding moment of Western environmentalism. But actually in the global South, people like Gandhi were forerunners on the ecological, even before Western thinkers. And for me, that is very, very important. And there's something there that we have to grapple with. So Uma, I mean, do you think that Phoenix Settlement ceded sort of ecological aspects to Gandhi? And I'd like to hear you on that. But the other thing is that, you know, when Gandhi does go back to India, the local is very important for his politics, and people know his biographical kind of story and so on, where he travels to villages, etc. But he recognizes the importance of local democracy, okay, as part of the nationalist imaginary, ensuring that people in villages have real power. And again, for me, in the world we are in today, the local is going to be very important in terms of the just transition, climate shocks. And again, brings me back to Phoenix Settlement. Do you think that was formative for him in terms of trying to think about local power, local kind of communities, provisioning, and so on and so on? Because village life in India, you know, the republicanist tradition that he represented was about deep democracy. So I'm just intrigued by that. Coming back to Naren, so Naren, I mean, this idea of commons public partnerships, I just want to push you on this a little bit, because I think it's a very important idea. In South Africa, again, we have a very jaded left politics. Everything begins and ends with the state. And I think coming out of your Sissy Gool House experience, the fact that you don't just see this as a standalone utopia, you don't just see this as an island of emancipation, you are thinking the big picture. This concept of the public commons partnership, for me, is very, very important. You're actually trying to reposition, in my view, the state. So I'd like you to say a little bit more about that, because again, it's an idea that has a powerful place in some of our activism in the climate justice space. But it's also important for the deep just transition. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for those comments and those questions. Naren, we can start with you. You can share your responses.
Thank you for the questions. Firstly, the situation around the Cape Town Jazz Festival. As many of us know, that festival has its origins related to the power of community. It began as a festival that was organized without lots of funds. It got support from the Netherlands, and the late Rashid Lombard, who did everything, who was a commoner, a creative cultural commoner, who used the ethics of care at all the time. If anyone had to have a chat with Rashid Lombard, it was an exercise and an experience of care. And that being the case, the Cape Town Jazz Festival has thrived gradually, and it got to the point of success many years later, decades later, and it held its ground for bringing a diverse experience for the audiences, and has continued to do that. So besides it being an experience in the city, one of the things that people felt uncomfortable about, well, from our activist point of view, is that the city saw it as cultural tourism. So we have to be very aware of the fact that cultural tourism has, from a neoliberal point of view, doesn't have anything to do with promoting culture. It doesn't have anything to do with in the interests of tourists. It has everything to do with ensuring that the cities are able to get lots of people coming in to make it financially viable for the city to thrive. So the Cape Town Jazz Festival was perceived as that kind of event, and that's not now. That was quite a few years ago. But what has happened in response to the question around the fact that the funding and from national government towards the jazz festival was suddenly cut. So how did we respond to that? Of course, it came as a shock. It came as there were many questions. There were no clear answers around it, and what happened was, so the question was, how did the artists, how did the communities, how did the audiences cope with that sudden change or with that disappointment? So the thing around that is Cape Town, fortunately, has many other festivals. And one is, there's another festival called Jazzathon, which has been in existence for many years. And that festival focuses very much on local artists, local musicians, has always done that. It's still in operation. And more recently, there has been the WOMAD festival that's been relaunched in South Africa, and it exists here in Cape Town since about over a year ago again. So there are other festivals. Then there are community arts festivals that take place here. And there is a community arts network that was set up, noting that in the history of arts and culture, I'm talking about community arts, community culture, we are fortunate to, when I say, well, I've only lived in Cape Town for the past 20 years, but I remember the beginnings of the Cape Town Arts Project, the Community Arts Project. And in a similar way, there have been many initiatives that have provided access for local artists and local musicians to thrive in some kind of way. So I'll just leave it at that for now, around the jazz festival. And in the last point around it is that we also have a conference here that happens annually. It's called Music Exchange. And I just attended it over the previous weekend. And it focused on, yes, I would say in a way, the ethics of care in the industry at the moment. And it brought in feedback from what is going on within the townships around mobilizing musicians and artists to work together. We had input from and the festival in Malawi. We had input from various role players in the music industry, and from the South African Music Rights Organization, focused on their corporate social investment and their community-focused support programs at this session. And of course, people who work on grassroots level also spoke at this event. So there are these different ways in which the power of the arts and is at community level is supported. But what happens is that it always works when the community takes the initiative to do something about it. So yeah, so that's that issue. The importance of simple living and the land commons. Okay, so from the experience of Sissigul House, and I'm also going to at the same time relate Vish's the question from Vish as after this, immediately relating to public private commons public partnerships. So the right to the city through urban commoning is one of the ways to think about the issues around the land commons. We have in South Africa, through various stages of genocide making, which was apartheid, which where people were forcibly removed, people were not allowed to be on the land. There was this whole process of enclosure. And even up to today, a modern way of enclosure is to ensure that buildings and open space is used for real estate, sort of commercial outcomes. And that approach in terms of goes immediately against the idea of commons public partnerships, and it is a means of preventing the right to the city by commoners. So when we say commoners, we talk of that's another word for citizens. Okay, so it in that way. So that's what we mean by that. So the policies, the neoliberal policies from the time of Let's go to 1652. We'll start there, and all the way up till now. And the spatial apartheid. That's what I mentioned earlier on in my presentation. Exists in various forms, and one example is the protests that took place here since around 2017 and even before that around the Khoi relationship with the Liesbeek River. And what had happened there was a threat that through public-private partnership, that we can't forget about that, where the Amazon, the company, not the river, the Amazon decided to house its Africa headquarters in observatory, and that was a done deal between the city of Cape Town through private political engagement, and at no point was that ever going to be that decision wasn't ever going to be reversed, but the resilience of the activists around that is what we need to be fully aware of. Even up till today, the building is there. It's a huge building that's used to occupy space, and they've even they've diverted the river, and the history behind that is more important right now. There was a point where the convergence of the Liesbeek River and the Black River took at that particular convergence is where the Khoi would meet. It was their community hub. It was that space, and so the protest was basically saying this is not okay. This is the land, the indigenous people. We spoke about it yesterday as well, around the Amazon, the people living in the forest, and all of that. It's similar to that kind of conversation, and so the land has personhood status. There's personhood status of indigenous communities with the land, and it is related to cultural understanding of the relationship, the strong human and land relationship. At the same time, related to conversation yesterday, it is strongly related to strong relationships with around animal well-being and animal wellness. So in terms of the situation with Amazon, they eventually settled there. They've got the entire, it's basically a shopping center. One of the things that happened out of betrayal was there was a divisions among the Khoi group, and one of the divided groups decided to negotiate their own arrangements to set up a Khoi San museum of information. There was a lot of protest against that, and the update on that is that museum has been allocated space, but nobody is allowed to go in. Okay, so the land commons is really important from the point of view of its relationship with humans, and various policies have been created, or various processes of dialogue, especially around expropriation of land, which there was a lot of misunderstanding of that. But the land commons is something that is really important. We spoke about it yesterday, where there is a need to go back into that conversation and to mobilize through as land and activists and advocacy people and movements What is happening in the world at the moment is very much what was going on in Europe in the Middle Ages, and what's going on now with complete shift towards a completely conservative right, challenged and right thinking. Well, there's not much thinking going on, but the attitude towards keeping things entirely for the economic elite and the political elite. So we have to really mobilize very strategically around this, and this is a call to all the social movements throughout the world to work in solidarity. And that's why I mentioned that at Sissi House, the ethics of care is what made that a success story. So the public commons
Naren?
part, sorry?
I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in here. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
sure. I went on too long. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
For the
sorry.
sake of time, we'll just move on to Uma, and then we'll end off with Farak. I see your hand. Yeah, if you could keep it brief, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for those questions, on Gandhi sleeping with young women, I don't mind any questions about Gandhi. You can handle any question of Gandhi. His whole life was open. He wrote about this experiment himself. So if you want to try and understand it, it all has to do with his sexual energies and his disappointment in his own body. So he was experiencing ejaculation and was very distressed about it, and he wanted to experiment, and he chose this way of experimenting. And some of his strongest supporters were very critical and upset by this. But I think another way of looking at this is to look at how the women who lay with him experienced this. So I'm looking forward to her diaries that are going to come out, and in which she kept a daily diary. So I would like to see what her own perspective on that was. But the more important question that you asked was about the children, and you used the word forced, and I've actually, I haven't used such a strong word, but the truth is that he became more and more of a disciplinarian. So in the early ages of Phoenix settlement, there was a more relaxed approach to everything. But as the struggle went on, the struggle influenced him to become firmer about what he wanted to achieve. And if you want to know about his own son is a good example of somebody, young person struggling, who wanted to be a doctor, who wanted to be a professional. And his father writes this letter from prison in 1909. You are not going to be a lawyer. You are not going to be a doctor. This is from somebody who was educated in England. Our life is one of poverty. We are not interested in making money. We are poor, and we're going to remain poor. Your work at Phoenix Settlement has to be about service. You need to develop your character. You need to attend to other people. And that's, so that's quite a tough letter for a young person to receive. But I also think of other younger people who were there, who enjoyed, you talked about Gandhi's humor. I mean, he was very playful with children. And so when he came from prison, or he came from Johannesburg to visit, he was extremely playful with children. They all loved him. So he was known, I think even in older age, he was very good with children. But he was hard. He was hard on his own sons. But they came to accept it. And in fact, Manilao, who is now told, you're not going to ever study, you're not going to go overseas on a scholarship, which was offered to Gandhi to send his son on a scholarship to England, and he did not give it to his son. But his son saw his own graduation as when he went to prison. So he was 16 years old. And he spent his 21st birthday in prison. But for him, it was a graduation in his father's school. So and the younger children during the resistance, campaign in 1913 when a lot of the adults were actually in prison. And some of those who went into prison in 1913 were 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds who voluntarily went. So I don't quite like the word forced. And then those who remained, they were teenagers like 12, 13, 14, and they took over the work at Phoenix. Then there was much work needed. So it's easy to see this as being forced, but when you're part of a community, the ethos of that community spreads right through. And so children, for them, this became the norm. This is how time was divided. But there's no doubt he became a disciplinarian and imposed that kind of view. On the ecological guy, I'm glad you mentioned that because his thoughts on the environment were really quite significant. I think it is more Tolstoy farm, which is really based in just outside, yes. I think it is there particularly that he shaped his ideas about the environment, about wastage, about water usage, and so forth. And then, of course, that influences the way in which he then tries to implement things at Phoenix Settlement. So I'm glad you brought that up. In terms of local democracy, so this is something, you know, in my study of Phoenix Settlement, it's not something I grappled with, but maybe I should have, because he wrote, Hind Swaraj was published at Phoenix, you know, the booklet, which he wrote on a ship from England to here. And I think it is within Hind Swaraj, which was published in he wrote it in 1909, and then it was published by the Indian Opinion Press and then banned in India. So it is in that text you're going to find your answer. And I personally haven't studied that all that much. So yeah, thank you for the questions, and yeah.
Awesome, thank you for that. Farak, we see your hand online, so if you can just unmute and share, and yeah, please keep it brief.
Thanks. Lots and lots of different responses, but there isn't enough time to do that. And Uma, it would have been really good if we were physically together, because there's lots of stuff I'd want to raise with you. Some in agreement and some possibly not in agreement. Firstly, thanks, Vishwas, for contextualizing Gandhi, because so much has been criticized negatively about him. So that was good. Uma, in terms of responses to you, my great-grandfather and Gandhi and Herman Kallenbach were contemporaries and friends. And what I've undertaken is to write a book about my great-grandfather, who ironically, when he died in 58, was defined as the richest Indian, and I do mean Indian, not Desi, not South African. And that interested me, that he had such a close relationship with Gandhi and with Kallenbach. And there were two other people as well. And then he died some decades later, the richest Indian, probably one of the richest in Johannesburg, of Johannesburgers. So that was interesting. I'm being pilloried by the family for the take I'm taking around him, and therefore talking about Gandhi too, and Herman Kallenbach. The relationship between Herman and Gandhi is of particular interest to me. I maintain that it was a gay relationship. Eric Itzken, who is Johannesburg Gandhi specialist, and I have talked about it. We don't necessarily agree. There are finite things that we introduce in that. But Herman lived a simple life as well. And I think he's been written out of a lot of the history around Gandhi. And I believe personally that he was really important to the development of Satyagraha and simple living. So that's the one side. Naren, in terms of the responses towards the jazz festival, interesting little experience. I've tried, from a simple life perspective, to introduce a regular annual jazzy music, come get together, whatever. And I did that a year ago. I was planning to do it this year. You would not believe the trouble I had with venues which had to make no commitment other than the fact that they would serve food and drink. And these were all places that do that anyway. And they were empty on the times when I was going to do the musical event, and I was going to pay for the musicians. The one actually disappointed me a week before. I'm still doing it in December. It's not going to be a major thing, but Johannesburgers and Gautengers who can come will be invited to it, and they're happy to partake. So it'll be interesting as an experiment to see if it becomes anything like what ultimately became the Jazz Festival in Cape Town. I doubt it, but let's see. And then the last point, and this one is controversial, and I'll probably get pilloried for it. I'm really tired of hearing the invocation around apartheid. We've had a new government for over 30 years. That's over a generation in place. I don't hear criticisms to that extent of a billionaire president who makes money out of fast food. He fed right into that whole plan to get McDonald's here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the ones that we should be holding accountable. He then goes up on a platform and talks about malnutrition. I mean, really, has he looked at himself? And then, of course, we've got a governing class of recently minted millionaires. So they have no interest whatsoever in the kinds of stuff that we're talking about yesterday and today. Yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at in terms of what I'm talking about and what I feel about. The other part is a criticism of us, and I include myself in it. We still feel, operate, think in silos. We don't actually reach across and see who else is doing good work. I've got a list of about 20 different individual groups around South Africa that are doing really great work around the commons. They are not present here today. They're not present physically, and they're not present online. I find that really interesting, but I find it really disappointing as well. So maybe there's more work to be done in terms of how we bring those folk in, engage them, and ensure that they are participants in a larger way. And the last point to Naren, interesting for you, Sissy Gould's person, who was also a friend of my great-grandfather's, was a Nakti man who married a Dolly woman who then was related to Sissy Gould. So there's an interconnectedness there. Clearly, you and I and their family people up here in Gauteng need to be doing more work together. Thank you, Make Believe Wuyani and Charles. I appreciate it. Ciao. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for that interesting contribution, Farak. With that, we will close the discussion and the session. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and your questions. I'm sure we could go on, but yeah, we need to move on to our next session. Let's give our speakers a round of applause.
We're now in the kind of closing space for this conference. The way we're going to do this is I'll just share a few observations about the engagement we've had, some of the themes that have come through, and then open it up for further discussion, deliberation, and so on. And then we'll wrap up, and then we'll have lunch, and we will go to our next public event, which is going to be very, very exciting as well. Roshana, you're going to set up? Okay, cool. That's a talk on foraging in the everyday. Okay, so the kind of problematic sort of shaping this approach to the commons in my Emancipatory Future Studies project was to try and center the commons within kind of activist praxis, within the academic space, as part of thinking the just transition that we have to deal with in the context of a heating world. The commons is very, very important because it is the oldest decolonial institution we have, actually. It's also important because it embodies deeply democratic praxis. And thirdly, it is very ethical. And so this journey to kind of figure out and explore the commons has been very, very exciting and very, very rich. Previously, as I mentioned when I opened this conference, we spent a lot of time in my Emancipatory Future Studies project thinking about food sovereignty commons. And we culminated that in a conference last year in Cape Town. And there's a book coming out on this, which looks at defending and strengthening existing commons, but also advancing the commons around the food transition we need. So if we center the commons in food systems, again, we are approaching it from a decolonial perspective. We are ensuring deep democracy, and we are ensuring ethics. So imagine if that prevails over our food system, as opposed to profits and monocultures, et cetera, et cetera. But that was one installment. The second installment was this conversation around the commons in the everyday. And again, to make visible what is invisible, to bring out of the shadows this idea of commons in our everyday lives. And I think it's been very, very rewarding, comrades and colleagues. And again, a big thank you to those that have contributed the blog pieces. It has really stimulated discussion. It has traveled. It's been reproduced on other platforms, in the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign platform. And as I said earlier, and I will end with this, we will have a publication out of this. This conference has been very, very rich to also go deeper, nuance, sharpen thinking around this. The third installment is going to be on the commons and decolonial conservation, and that's going to happen next year. So some of the themes that have been explored around food and commons, this particular dialogue, we're going to pull through into next year as well. And again, I'm trying to think about how to do that creatively. Should we again maybe use the blog post idea? I'm not sure. Should we then, or invite specific contributors that are doing this work? I know, Sam, you're doing frontline work on this. There's Masifundise working with small scale fishers. They're doing good work on this. I'm part of a wildlife conservation organization. They're doing some good work on this, et cetera, et cetera. So we could pull some of that together. So anyway, that's the kind of incubation and generation of ideas around the commons that's been happening. Very quickly, I think the first thing to kind of highlight thematically that comes through is the commons features around various aspects of everyday life and social life and so on. We hinted at conservation issues. It came up in various of the blogs that were shared. But again, what's interesting is that for me, it incites us to deepen our thinking. The commons approach is an alternative to fortress conservation. It is. And so again, how do we rethink the boundaries of the wild? Where does the wild begin and where does the wild end? And so this is something very exciting. Where do we bring in indigenous knowledge? And I would argue with the commons, you centering it, okay? This is very, very powerful, very, very important. But it's a theme that has come up, and I think it's something, as I said, we will pursue. The second important theme that came up was around, well, this idea of mass tourism featured in the conversation. Again, it comes in at different points. But there's something we never really kind of unpack. So mass cruise tourism, for example, is very, very problematic for the oceans. In the climate justice charter movement space, Charles is leading our Rights of Nature campaign. We've been talking about this. These cruise ships are horrific for the oceans. They dump a whole lot of black and gray waste into our oceans. Okay, they're like moving cities, literally. Okay, but the ecological impacts are devastating. So the ocean commons, over and above all the other stresses, plastics and too much of carbon and stuff like that, coral bleaching. I mean, this is just another big challenge for our ocean commons. But then again, you know, we also spoke about mass tourism in a different context in terms of spatial commons. And whether it's local villages or big urban spaces like Barcelona, etc. We need to think about this. It comes back to the theme of simple living. You know, we are all on this kind of treadmill to kind of globalize ourselves. We're being conscripted, okay, to this liberal vision of our world and our planet. But it's a problem ecologically, basically. So again, we haven't fully kind of explored simple living, but I'll come back to that just now. I do think it forces us to think about how do we find the wonder in the local? How do we find a spirit of adventure in the local? In a climate-driven world that we are in now, I would argue mass tourism is over, actually. We're going to have to rethink this in a very, very fundamental way. The other big theme that came out was around ethics, and there's different dimensions to this. The starting point has been recognizing the relationality of the commons. And this is not about just between commoners and users of the commons. It's a relationality that extends beyond to the more than human ecosystems, earth relations, etc. And I think this is crucial. And so different kind of articulations around the ethics have come to the fore, notions of reciprocity, notions of regeneration, and of course, the ethics of care and simple living. I just want to use simple living to just explicate a bit more. So in some of the thinking some of us are doing in the climate justice charter movement space, simple living is a concept that has to stand and connect with zero waste in the world we are living in right now. We have to have an understanding of dematerializing our lives. And zero waste takes us there. Zero waste prompts us not just to do, recycling and reuse and repurpose, which is all important, but it prompts us to think redesign. So things can last, things can endure. In the society we are living, it's throwaway, right? So it's linear, landfills, and just that treadmill continues, and so on and so on. So simple living married to zero waste kind of enriches this ethic. On the other leg, this idea of shared affluence is important. So if you come to Sissy Gould House, you come to Gandhi's Phoenix settlement, there was a shared affluence about this space, but not measured in econometric terms, money, and so on. There was a shared affluence around culture, around food, around spirituality, and so on and so on. There was a shared affluence that cannot be measured in classical bourgeois terms. You can't measure this. This is a very different kind of affluence. And so simple living can take you into a very interesting place, okay, where you think about your wealth and your affluence very differently, okay. I mean, I would have said something about ethics of care, but we don't have time, and that can come up in the conversation. Linked to ethics, of course, is commoning as praxis, sort of reproduction of the commons. And that's come through beautifully in many, many of the contributions. But there is a need for greater nuance around how we think commoning as praxis. There's different aspects to this, and it's come out in different ways. So the commons is anchored in groups. And these groups might be a community, they might be a whole city, and so on and so on and so on. So we need to think about this idea in this topology and commoning practice. Who is the group? The other is, who are the users, or use rather? What is the use of the commons? Okay, what is it being provisioned for? It might be provisioned to provide housing. It might be provisioned to give you water from a spring. It might be grazing, rangelands. It might be a forest, etc., etc. So that's part of the topology that came out for me. The other thing that was important was about ownership. And I think this is not a clear-cut issue around the commons. In some places, it is communal tenure. We've heard this several times. In other words, there is a legal framework. It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to a group, okay? In other places, it just might be municipal land that is used for grazing and so on and so on, okay? It might be a public good like a bus system, a library, etc., etc. So again, how does ownership fit into the commons? again, has to be figured out in situ as you look at it, okay? The other aspect is the democratic institutional arrangements. And again, it comes in different permutations and configurations. How a local village manages common grazing lands, how the farmers would work together to manage that, to how a community will manage a forest. Will it be the local government? Will they be a sub-part of the local government? These institutional arrangements, again, will vary. They're variegated. They're not going to be one size fits all. But there's a democratic rationality to them, which is really exciting. The users have voice. The users have control. The users have ethical responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. So commoning is rich. I think this is what I wanted to say. It's not one thing, and it cannot be reducible. You got to really figure it out in context. The other thing is, and I want to link this ethics and commoning praxis to the larger conversation that has been featuring in this space. And that is, it's very clear that if we go down the path of commoning and commoners and commons, and particularly if it's grounded in this kind of conscious ethics and transformative praxis, we are embedded in a co-eval relationship with nature. We are recognizing as a premise that we are dependent on nature. We are recognizing that we need things in nature, but we are part of it, okay? So this also means that a commoning perspective is not anti-human. It is anti-human supremacy. Okay, this is very, very important. Commoners, if they are genuine commoners working with this kind of ethics of a co-eval relationship, are not seeking to wipe out nature. Okay, they recognize what you can take, how much you can take, and so on. So this is very, very important, because I think sometimes we get into an ultra green position and humans become the problem without nuance. And one of the reasons I have placed a lot of research time on the commons is because I don't agree with that perspective. I don't agree with the misanthropic perspective that humans are the problem. Some humans in large oil corporations are the problem. Some humans who control global finance, yes, are the problem. The imperial presidency in the United States is a problem. So we got to really think about this in very nuanced, careful ways, which relates also to the sacred. And I am not a religious person by any stretch of the imagination, but the sacred emerged in this, and I wanted it also in this conversation because I think it's important. If you want to go in that direction, I think it's beautiful, it's wonderful, and we had some great inputs on that. And I think, again, as part of the ethics of commoning, the topology of commoning, thinking this through beyond human supremacist, what I would call ecological domination, there's something rich here around the sacred, which we didn't explore. The fourth point I want to make is that, you know, for me, sitting in an academic space, what this intellectual intervention has been all about is to unsettle what is a triadic relationship, a hegemonic triadic relationship in social thought. That is the state, market, and society. If you were to study sociology at the university or international politics or economics, you'll only learn about these three institutions. You will not learn about the commons, okay? So what I've been doing with this intervention is to say, nope, there's something else called the commons, okay? There's another leg on which our societies stand, our socio-ecological systems stand. It's the commons. And I think I'm very pleased, I'm very excited with the outpouring from the Food Sovereignty Commons work to this and what's going to come next on rethinking conservation. The other point very quickly is that we all recognize that the materiality of the commons in the everyday is important. Where does race, class, gender, ecological relations fit in? And we've had that rich conversation. This hasn't been the commons in abstract models and that kind of thing, this high-level heuristic. We've been grounding it in societies, you know. The class dynamics around libraries came out very, very powerfully and so on. gendered issues around reproduction and land and the commons came out very powerfully here. So again, we had a rich conversation, a critical conversation, which is really, really valuable. The other point, and there's two final points, and then I'm going to keep quiet and I want to hear from you guys, is kind of challenges around the commons. The one challenge around the commons is how we define it. So there is sort of instrumentalist reason approaches. These are resources, and I think it's too stuck in an anthropocentric framework. And if we move away from that towards commonwealth as life enabling systems, democratically used by a user group, we go in a very, very different direction. Okay, we are thinking in richer relational terms. I think this is what I'm getting at. So there is a challenge around how we conceptualize the commons. And I'm saying in the project that I've been working on with you guys, I can see it going in an exciting new direction conceptually. I think the second important thing is culturing the commons. There was such rich stuff around culture and its intersection with the commons, including, by the way, your talk, which was excellent. So, but we heard about, documentary film. We heard about an exhibition coming out of Sissigul. We heard about the press in Gandhi settlement and more. Okay, I mean, in Japan, the shrines, the kind of melding with Shinto and Buddhism and so on and so on. There's so much richer culturally around the commons. And I think, again, it's a challenge for us to think in these terms. We should not just, again, see the commons narrowly. It's embedded in this cultural matrix, which is really exciting. The third important challenge is around how we think the tragedy of the commons today. It's definitely not what Gareth Harding spoke about, which was, free for all property and so on, because he didn't have a concept of the commons in his thinking. And he made a very, very disparaging argument, which ended up carrying a lot of weight. But the tragedy of the commons today relates to marketization of everything. That's the tragedy. So if you just look at the ocean, the over extraction, industrial scale fishing, and what it is doing to marine ecosystems, etc., that's the tragedy of the commons right there. If you look at the logging and the kind of destruction of rainforests because of cattle ranching and so on, that's the tragedy of the commons and so on and so on. So again, we have to amplify this critique and nuance this critique. I call it the last great dispossession of the commons. Maybe it's a bit dramatic, but I do think the logic of accumulation today is such that it wants to subsume everything. It wants to take everything and place it under the rationality of the market and profit making and so on. And it's actually a dystopian world. The other challenge we face, and it came up briefly in various inputs, is the idea of getting the state to think and act like a commoner. It's a very serious challenge. Now, we didn't explore this idea of the commons public partnership, but it is a very powerful idea, okay? It comes from the Commons Strategy Group. We've been working with it in our work in food sovereignty campaigning, etc. It's going to be in the book coming out around food sovereignty commons. Again, this is a counterpoint. It is a counter-hegemonic alternative to public-private partnerships, okay? And again, if we can be creative about this, we can lock the state into a very different paradigm. We can democratize the state from below, and we can redirect the state. So this is a very, very powerful idea. And then finally, I'm going to end with this, that we will produce a publication. Once again, thank you to all contributors. Here's a moment here for you. We're going to give you at least till the end of November or sooner to add anything you want to add based on the conversation, the feedback you've received, enrich your short inputs. Maybe you want to add a page or two, maybe you want to flesh out a vignette or a story or something or an aspect, please do it. We are then going to compile this into a publication, as I said, and it'll use the same thematic structure that we use for this conference. And of course, we're going to circulate this. We're going to launch it next year with another tool that Kawe and her activist team in Food Sovereignty Campaign have developed on the Food Sovereignty Commons. And we probably also launch it if the Food Sovereignty Commons book comes out, maybe not, depending on timing. But we'll definitely launch these two things together. There is another book coming out on worker cooperatives, deep democracy, and earth care from below. So these might be things we package next year, and we're going to get it to travel into activist spaces, community spaces, etc., to again break through around this idea of the commons, and so on. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there and open it up for your inputs, reflections, etc. And thank you also to all of you for coming. And thank you to the EFS project, and thank you to the COPAC team that played their role, Charles and Kawe and Jessica and Jane and particularly Elodie, who came up from Krabao, and of course Roshana, who came up from Cape Point. They also made the time from their busy lives to be here and to share. Thank you so much. But let's hear from you. We're not over. I don't know who wants to say reflections.
Yeah, just I must say, what I found useful was there was an absence of jargon, which often bedevils this kind of group when you want to have a conversation. People use in-crowd language, and it was relatively plain and good to understand. Some of the theoretical issues that I think are, I mean, you've raised the issues about how we relate to race, class, gender, and those perennial issues are clearly important. But I think sometimes what I find, because I don't work in this space, sometimes I find it a soft and lovely space to be meditative, and the other one is hard and crude, right? Where when you're working there with people who have nothing, and the idea of the commons being out there and being defended, or the alliances to defend it, we don't really see that the people who are disrupting or destroying the commons are people with guns. And we don't want to discuss this. I mean, if it's Abatlali talking about 25 or people getting killed, so I think that we are dealing with people who don't debate with us. There's not a contest of visions in a room, and then the best vision wins. They change the discourse through force and force of violence, and the state and others who don't want to preserve what we have or what we're trying to defend, starve it out because you are objecting to them. And so I think we need to look at how we build, how we defend, that is more layered and not simply at the level of ideas. Not that even if it's practical, they come and destroy it. So that's the one.
Defending the common.
Yeah, how we defend it or even construct it. Because if they're going to take the land over for malls or for whatever, because this is happening in India, and others, farmland and others gets used by IT people are not planting. So I mean, there's a lot of that contestation, and I'm glad you brought through the issue of the sacred and you like the spiritual, because I think it often gets ignored by seasoned materialists, so just wanted to bring that in. I'll come back again. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I was going to pass this opportunity in favor of something. It was really interesting at the garden to do a creative exercise, something that I like to do and that I was saying. So I was going to be saving my comment in place of that. But Prof or Vishwa asked for comments and wrap-up comments over what anybody could have taken. What I took from this is that with this emancipatory studies, future studies, I found many principles and qualities that are helpful in human evolution. I found concepts like love. People were talking about care and these emotions and these feelings that make a person besides their humanoid qualities. I did get from future studies about unpacking about the many events that happened politically, starting with colonialism. There was touch on apartheid. There was, I didn't hear a lot of AIDS talking. Maybe this was not important for this project. And I also didn't hear a lot about recession. I did hear about lockdown and progress after COVID-19, about libraries opening, about a book being a common space. So having this literature being known by many and having it being a space of thought, a school of thought. It was so refreshing to think of it like that. And many other items, questions that were brought up, and most of it was healing. Healing was really such a buzzword, because when you're in the garden space, you're here to center and ground and touch the soil and remove all that is not wanted, and really come back to your true self, to know where you end and where you begin, and your real voice at first, to thyself be true. And I would like to comment a little bit about these universal principles and laws that make a human, and one of them is the universal law of abundance. And when wanting to create the work of service, money can be important in accessing the feeling of bliss. With money, you can climb Kilimanjaro. You have the resources to do that and stretch your eye as far as it can see, and have that be a spiritually uplifting event. And so with cryptocurrency, it's not a fiat currency. It's not fiat in economics. I know that some people categorically not want to be dealing with money at this time, because money has so many germs, and materialism can be so base, even though it can get you a lot of access. So maybe they can look at money in a different way, in having it not be influenced by inflation and the greed of another person, but also making it have a controlled amount within a society that wants you to create your own money and your financial wellness in order to self-actualize. Cryptocurrency, I think, should be spoken about in the COPAC society, in natural platforms and groups, because cryptocurrency has a lot of spiritual undertones, in that you have the control to make how much you want based on the faith you have. It eliminates the trust on another person, and codependence, and promotes interdependence and transparency. These are the qualities that we see in humanity, in true humanness and spiritual evolution. And with COPAC, I'd like to see how they grow, and how they develop, and how they grow economically, or in their economic development, in what else is there besides the controlling capitalist fiat currency.
Thanks. I just have a very quick comment. So Uma, back to you. I just wanted to say, I did actually hang on every word that you said, because I'm so fascinated by this idea of communities. And I think that they will have to play a crucial role in the future. Whether you just kind of turn your own community into an eco-village, or however you end up doing it, or whether you kind of plan ahead now and start putting them together now. But it does leave me with this big question mark around leadership, because normally communities have to have leaders. Otherwise, it just probably won't happen. It's very difficult for things to happen without strong leaders. And I so agree that nobody is perfect. And so I think the thing that I will be pondering is, what are the deal breakers? Trump came up, Ramaphosa came up. So these are the questions, Gandhi, obviously, these are sort of the questions that I think I'll be wanting to talk to all of you afterwards. It's like, what are the deal breakers? What can we tolerate in leaders and what should we not tolerate? But all in all, thank you. This was fascinating. And I feel like I've learned so much that my brain has stretched tremendously. So thank you so much to all of you.
What took me into thinking more deeply around the commons was my feminism, my ecofeminism, and the work that I've been involved in now for 14, 15 years around really working with women and their communities to defend the commons. And that's what's happening on our continent. It's happening in South Africa, where lands and forests and oceans are being taken over by massive corporations exploiting these for profit, and where people who are living in the commons are literally immiserated. What took me into a focus on the commons was care, and it's in the commons that social reproduction takes place. Without the commons, the reproduction of life, the reproduction of humanity is not possible. And that's what's happening, is that the marketization and the financialization and the land grabbing, all of these processes that have been underway for centuries and in some ways are escalating. We're seeing massive new grabs for new resources, so minerals and metals that are needed for these supposed transitions that are happening in other parts of the world. So without the commons, the reproduction of life is impossible. And so for me, the commons is a real place, a point of inspiration. For me, it's the majority of Africans live in the commons. It's a living commons. And so it's about figuring out how to defend the commons, because it's there. In other parts of the world, it's been destroyed. They're little pockets of commons, whereas on our continent, there's a huge commons that's living, that needs to be defended. And the people that are suffering from the guns and the threats are the people that are living in the commons every day. I think there's also something very powerful about the commons around democracy. So this whole idea of thinking about democracy differently, radical democracies that are not this stilted, suffocated democracy that we see under capitalism, but the everyday living democracy. And I think one of the things that I've been quite challenged by is that colonization and neo-colonization has also transformed the commons. It's used people in the commons to like be the stilts, to hold up colonization and capitalism. And so with that, you've seen the distortion and the undermining of democracy in the commons. So how do we work to reclaim democracy in the commons, to transform often quite patriarchal practices in the commons? So there's a real need to be thinking about transformation as we think about the commons. But I've loved this conversation. It's been very rich and deep. I've been hungry for a conversation like this. So thank you very much for opening this space. And I really look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. I think for me, something that really stood out and that I'm taking away is the focus on the everyday. So the commons in the everyday. So that was important to me because I think that often, you know, we gather and we come into these spaces and we don't often take the time to reflect on our own practice. So in the context of like what, I think the question I raised yesterday, what in the everyday practice reflects the world or the commons or / solidarity that we want to see in the world, but then also what in our everyday practice does not support that commons and the sort of community or the solidarity that we're trying to build, because I think that all of us, or I speak for myself, we are complicit in upholding some of those systems that actually keep us from transformation and democracy. And we need to reflect on our own complicity in that, as well as the state and the other figures. So something that I'm also taking back is that communities are not like homogenous. So, you know, the focus of keeping it local and contextualizing it, grounding it in those case studies are also important, because this speaks to our own agency and what we bring, and that we shouldn't wait for leaders or the perfect sanitized models or funding or others, because we have agency and we kind of need to step into that too. Yeah, so I think thank you for the invitation, and yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm also, I can subscribe to a lot of the things that have been said. Just 2 points. And one was that when you were mentioning tourism as well, you started with it, no mass tourism. You spoke of ocean commons, spatial commons. But for me, spatial commons are very much tied with cultural commons. So when I speak and you refer to Barcelona and things about the housing, the rights to housing, for me, it's more about the city becoming a stage. It's devoided. So where are the spaces that allow for community, where community reproduces, so to speak, and I can speak of many examples to this. But more than anything, why am I saying this? I'm linking it to your last point on the challenges around the commons. You spoke of how we think of the tragedy of the commons, on marketization of everything, right? There's a professor in Mallorca that invites us to think of mass tourism as a factory. It's not something that's in the air. It's something that has the same impacts on the territory, on the theft and the pollution of our resources, on say work illnesses. We see stress, we see cancers, other things that also come with that. And we also see impacts on those who live near the factory and the workers, because mass tourism does not produce good jobs, so to speak. It's still the owners who take the wealth, and the rest is not. And with that, I wanted to invite us of a second thing that it's coming as well, and also it's something that is aerial, but it's much of a threat to our commons, which is the whole push for, yesterday we surfaced it a bit, AI, not so much from an approach of cultural commons, but the actual impact of on nature. There's an ecologist in Aragon, which is the region where my mom comes from, which is a very poor region in Spain, water scarce, subsistence farmers, and we've had 10 AI centers coming, really, really challenging people's access to water. So there's a group organizing there, and I love how their organizing slogan is, which is, "Your cloud is drying my river." So, because it's coming, in Chile it's coming, and in other places it's coming, and it's again, I think that was that. Well, one last point was on simple living. And it was, somehow, I don't know, it connects with me because I've been couple of years reading quite a lot and in conversations on degrowth, which is a movement that it's growing, not growing, but it's becoming mainstream more in the northern world. And recently with two activists, they were talking that as it becomes mainstream, it's shedding off the approach of global justice and becoming more inward looking. What does mean degrowth? And as EU is funding and there's more policy driven, so it's more at local level. What they say is, if it's decoupled from global justice, changing the system, which is something that has come here, then it's an hedonistic simple living. And I don't think it's how we think of simple living here, but it's something to also keep forefront. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. there are many thoughts that have come because of these discussions that we have been having. Just on the cruise ships that you spoke about, Vish. Usually they'd go into these Caribbean countries, and at the very least, people would get off, they would buy all of these things and contribute to the local economy. But increasingly, they are building their own private islands. So when they stop in the Caribbean, they are no longer, assisting or contributing to the local economy because they control the entire value chain. You have to come and put up your stall in a privately owned island by MSC or the Dutch cruise liners. So they're not just, polluting in the oceans, but they're also part of the land grab that is happening around the world. But also, what has come out in this conversation is the fact that the oceans, which are our largest carbon sink, are at the forefront of the climate crisis. And there was the global tipping points report that just came out talking about what's happening to coral reefs because of a 1.5 degree overshoot. It's going to decimate coral reefs. It's going to, the impact on the 500 million people who directly depend on corals for their food and for their livelihood. You can just imagine what's going to happen. And the Climate Justice Charter movement, I'm a part of, and many of us in this room, we put out a statement on the 27th, calling for the country to be prepared for a 1.5 degree overshoot. Because if the world overshoots by 1.5 degrees, South Africa is overshooting by 3 degrees. Because on average, we're warming at about twice the global rate of temperature increase. And that's going to be catastrophic. So in 2015, we said we are living on a new planet when we saw the 1 degree overshoot above industrial temperatures. But a lot of scientists are saying 1.5 degree overshoot is here to stay. And we all have to mobilize and organize around that. Our individual actions, they do go, they do contribute, but we have to mobilize and organize as movements beyond just, one individual not using a plastic or one individual not eating beef and all of that, but towards movement building. I think that's essential to protect the commons, especially the ocean commons. I mean, if you look at around South Africa, our oceans are zoned into different blocks for oil and for gas extraction. So on one hand, the government is talking about the Just Transition Partnership. On the other hand, they are passing the Gas Amendment Bill. It provides the infrastructure for drilling for gas in our oceans. On the other hand, they are providing the Upstream Petroleum Development Bill, again strengthening, simplifying the legal infrastructure for the exploitation of the ocean commons. And we have to be in deep solidarities with communities like Amadiba that are at the forefront of this. Recently, there was a case at the Constitutional Court. We were there as the Climate Justice Charter movement showing solidarity. The right to say no to all of this ongoing extractivism. We are seeing the same extractivism around Newcastle as well. Coal mines being set up in the community, being set up in aquifers, in a country that is arid with a rainfall far below, the global average. So I think we just need to reflect in the moment that we're at. I mean, we are at a turning point, and if we don't press hard on the brakes, this global commons, the Earth commons, is going to be lost. That's the moment where we are at. And now more than ever is the time for movement building. And going back to your point, Farouk, it's important to work beyond, beyond silos as part of different movements fighting for the same thing. We may have different tactics, different forms of analysis, and different strategies, but the enemy is the same, and the enemy is carbon capitalism in all of its forms and facets. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Charles. So for me, my reflection over the past 2 days, so the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign has been working really closely with the idea of the commons over the past year and trying to navigate how we engage in this with our communities, in particular around the issue of food, but also other elements like water and land, etc. And I think these past 2 days for me have been a really great reflexive exercise. Watching or being in the space where people are engaging in these blog pieces has been really, really inspirational to me, and seeing the ways in which these blog pieces are sort of triggering discussion, triggering thoughts. So I think I want to start by thanking everybody who wrote a blog piece, for one, for giving us this material to work with, but also everyone in the room, as well as everyone on Zoom who've been participating in this conversation as well. Seeing that back and forth has been really, really beautiful. And I think this is a part of the commenting experience as well. But I also think that the blog pieces, the discussions that they've triggered are a really great response to Hardin's tragedy of the commons, as Prof mentioned. Commons in the everyday, and seeing how communities engage with the commons, even when they have challenges. We can see challenges that are incredibly nuanced and incredibly complex, that are way more indicative of how human beings interact with each other than I think Hardin's view of the commons was. It was very simplistic, very black and white. And so I think bringing the community into this conversation is critical. And I think these blog pieces really do play a really good, big role in that. And if you haven't read them, I highly encourage you guys to go read them. They're amazing, the vast majority of them. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a real privilege to be in the space and yeah, hear everyone's thoughts and reflections. I think, yeah, the first level, this is like landing for me, is obviously on the personal level, and particularly in the aspect of ethics, just thinking about the ethics of care, regeneration, simple living. I think those are quite interesting themes that I'll be thinking on going forward. But I think also from a broader perspective, this conversation has really been impactful. In some of our previous team meetings, I think one of the things that we can all agree on is the fact that everyone has the sense on a personal level that something is wrong with the way that we've been living, with the way that we've been doing life. And for a lot of people, they're dealing with that on a personal level and dealing with their contradictions. But I think also on a broader scale, we can see that politically, ecologically, socially, the way we've been going is not okay and not sustainable. And so it's important for us to have these conversations about how we, I guess, yeah, stop the brakes. And so I really do echo what Charles has been saying. I think our consciousness as a collective has been stuck in that state market society perspective. And how do we bring this perspective to the forefront, this idea that there's another leg which our society stands on, the commons. And I think it resonates and it lands for people. And so for me is how do we expose this? How do we bring this to the ground level? And how do we build those solidarities? And so I think, yeah, going forward, how do we further this? How do we deepen this? How do we build a movement around this? Thank you.
Well, I think the highlight of the past 2 days was Elodie's talk. I think it was really inspirational, and it encouraged me and hopefully others to just create and really pour myself into that process, and because of the benefits. So I think you gave a good case for why we should be creative. And yeah, hopefully we all manage to create and it benefits ourselves and others in the process. Yeah, not just for our individual gain, but it is also part of a commons, the creative commons. Yeah.
Hi, online folks, does anybody want to make a final comment, short comment? Naren, go for it.
Yeah, I really appreciate the 2 days. I was here yesterday, and I think it's covered, as I would sense, it's recognized the viability of other commons. I think that's come across here. And in saying that, I've shared in the chat some other work we're doing from the Cape Town Commons Collective in the Cape Flats. And it has to do with the feminism commons and the safety commons. And it's brought together the Women's Assembly Movement, the Cape Town Commoners Collective, and then the Institute for the Healing of Memories were all part of that. We just did a session at Bertha House and invited, it was very, very interesting, and it brought together very important dialogue from grassroots level. So I've shared that, the information about that, and we're going to continue with that, and I'll keep everyone updated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Final comment online? Nobody? No takers? Okay. Well, thank you to all of you for spending the time with us for the past 2 days. Somebody posted a comment. Charles, do you want to just read it? I can't read it.
The comment is from Norma, says, thank you very much to all for creating this important and productive space. The only issue I missed was a focus on childhood. I will email Vish about this in case it can be helpful.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Norma. It's welcome. And if you want to write something about it, we can always add it. 1, 2, 3 pager. That's the kind of think pieces we've solicited. So it's welcome. You got till the end of November. Okay. Thank you again to everybody online who spent the time and who came through, and then everybody who's joined us in this physical space. Congratulations. We got to go for Charles' announcements, whatever.
There's just one more comment on the chat which says, in memory of Stephen Marine.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Comrade who has also been grounded in the commons. But let's also break for lunch. And then we got to promptly, before 2, actually, gather there because some colleagues have to leave for Cape Town.